Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I don't have many X stories saved onto my drive or in my memory, but I got a pretty long tale involving my grandma and a lot of weird shit in Kentucky. Most of it comes from when I was living with my grandma for a few years. Roughly from 2002 to 2004 if memory serves, and while there were gaps between the weird occurrences, it sure didn't feel like it. I should also mention I was living with my grandma at the time because of the death of my parents. I was 15 when I moved in with her in 2002, and I was, at least at the time, a deadbeat high school dropout. I figure I'll tell one of the shorter tales to see if anyone's interested, or if I should GTFO. My grandma was very, very Irish, and she was fiercely loyal to the folk traditions of the Emerald Isle. She had a very particular arrangement of decorations in every single room, a crucifix with Jesus upon the cross, 2 fairy wall ornaments, and either a teddy bear or some other stuffed animal. She would always tell me that it was to appease the fae of the land, while still showing reverence unto Jesus, but being an angsty teen I thought it was all bullshit. The first night I had slept in my bedroom at the farmhouse, I tossed out a majority of the decorations with exception to the crucifix. When I woke up in the morning, everything I had in the room was misplaced, slightly. It was a weird feeling waking up in a room you had just gone to sleep in, and noticing that every single decoration and piece of furniture was moved ajar by just a few inches. Just enough to notice, but enough to make you double take if it was always like that. I tried to ignore it, but it kept bugging me all day, and in the evening I went back up to my room and rearranged everything just how I remembered it. Nothing would really happen until much later, when I was just about to go to bed. I heard a loud, sharp tapping coming from the window, and it immediately jolted me awake, but I found myself paralyzed. I guess it must have been sleep paralysis, but most accounts I hear about sleep paralysis describe it coming after someone wakes up, while this was just as I was about to fall asleep. I was stuck in my bed as I saw the window slide open, and some sort of silhouette entered. Lanky, but pot-bellied. I couldn't make out any of its features, as it stood at the very edge of the moonlight from the window. I felt this just distinct desire to vomit. I couldn't really sense anything else. I couldn't smell, taste, or even really hear. All I heard was that sound of the ocean you hear when you put your ear up to a seashell. Just as the figure was about to approach my bed, I heard someone rushing to the door of my room. The doorknob rattled, as I had locked it before I went to bed, and I heard my grandma shout something through the door. I think it was maybe something in native Irish, I'm not quite sure, but the creature hissed and slowly crawled out through the window once more, and the paralysis was broken. I immediately upchucked all over the bedsheets and scrambled to unlock the door for my grandma, who proceeded to give me a stern lecture about removing the decoration, and how this is what happens when you don't appease the fae.
I work at a mental hospital, and there was this very sweet patient named Daniella. She was a middle-aged woman from Romania, and she has been with us for several months now. Since she has no money, it has been difficult to find a place to send her. We did finally find a place, and she was planned to leave that morning. All night she struggled to sleep. I always wanted to ask her about Dracula and Transylvania, but never wanted to be rude. So she's sitting in the day room, and I decided to see if I could trick her into talking about it. Are there castles in Romania? Suddenly she got all smiley and immediately said yes. Dracula's castle in Romania. She then said a few names/sayings in Romanian I didn't understand, followed by, I love him, Dracula, and the people in Romania are all vampires. Meanwhile she has a giant silver crucifix around her neck. So morning comes. I'm a girl and had a soft spot for her, so I say goodbye to her and give her a side hug. I tell her, God bless you, something she tells me frequently. She takes my hand and kisses the back of it. She says, I love you, a thing patients will often say. I say I love you too. I go to my car and drive home. I felt something on my hand where she kissed, and there was a very tiny black spider. I killed it. I think it may have bit me. My hand actually feels a little burny. There's a tiny mark, barely noticeable. Could be from a kitty claw. Later I realized Daniella is similar to Dracula. 7 letters. Both start with D and end with A. I don't think she cursed me. I think it was more of a blessing of sorts or something neutral.
I've seen a ghost lady. In the house I lived in during childhood, a few weird things have happened to my family, and the first time I saw the ghost lady, I slept in my brother's room the night before. He wanted to sleep in my room so he could sneak out of the house easier, since his room was upstairs across from my parents' room. It was a Saturday morning, and I woke up early and the house was silent, so I figured I'd stay in bed and play some DS and not wake everyone up. Eventually I got bored, so I got up, but what I saw was a lady across from me staring right at me. It was only her torso and up. She looked like a white lady despite all over her being a shade of white. I was frozen in fear, and she just kept looking at me, then turned to the door, looked back at me and disappeared. The door slammed and I screamed bloody murder. My parents came in running, and I remember trying to explain it only for them to tell me it was just a bad dream, even though I was wide awake and it wasn't sleep paralysis because I sat up, and that's when I saw her. A few years later, I was in the living room and my brother was coming in from the kitchen door. I turned to look who was coming in, and sure enough, he was entering from the kitchen. Then something else caught my attention. It was the lady. She was by the end of the stairs making her way up. I started screaming for my brother to come look, that the lady was here. This time, instead of just her torso and up, it was her whole body. He got there in time to see her going up the stairs and turn right into the room. He asked me who that was, and I explained to him it was the lady I saw from all those years ago. He didn't believe me and grabbed a knife before heading upstairs, like if you can shank a ghost, baka. No one was in his room. Again years later, this one time my mom called me to ask where I was. I told her I was with friends. She said that was weird because she hears someone walking around in my brother's room, pacing back and forth, but she just got home from dropping him off at a friend's. She called 911, the cops came, checked it out, and again no one was there. We had a dog for a short period of time because for some reason it would always bark at the stairs, refusing to go up, and would fight us if we ever tried to bring him up there. He wasn't scared of stairs because we had a finished basement, and he would always run up and down those stairs. The barking became too much. What's funny is that my brother, besides seeing her that one time with me, has never experienced anything in his room.
If you count a Bigfoot encounter as creepy and paranormal, yes. Back in the early 2000s, I was camping out in Kernville, California, north of Bakersfield along the Kern River. Up in the mountains where they used to mine for gold and silver in the 1800s. It was like 11:30 at night, and we were all sitting around the campfire talking and hanging out. I was only around 17, so I wasn't drinking, and I didn't smoke or do drugs. We heard some coyotes going absolutely batshit up the hill, and we thought they might be fighting over food, so we grabbed our big spotlights and went to scare them off. Because they'll come in your campsite and ruin everything and make a huge mess. When we walked up to the road, we saw a coyote go across ahead of us about 30 yards away, running at Mach 10. He ran down the hill and disappeared somewhere. Then when we looked up the hill with our lights, just barely on the edge of the visible beam, we saw a huge silhouette of a humanoid standing as tall as a Joshua tree. Maybe 7 or 8 feet. It stood there and watched us for about 10 seconds, before taking off up the hill and cleared the ridge in like 3 steps and was gone. We ran back to camp and were clutching machetes and shovels until like 4 a.m. when we decided to go to sleep. When everybody woke up the next afternoon, we went up the hill where we saw the Bigfoot, and in the sand and dirt were huge footprints. Easily twice the size of my foot, and I wear a 12 EE. We camped there 2 or 3 times a month for years, and that was the only time I saw one. I think it was living in an abandoned silver mine or something.
This is a personal story. A friend of mine owns a pioneer ranch in a western state where I grew up. The land is broken into several parcels, but altogether it's about 20 miles square in the mountains. Be out for the weekend at my friend's Ancestral Ranch, a 150-year-old structure hidden in the mountains with national forest on all sides. It's a big home with 6 bedrooms still being maintained to the level that they can host guests, a rundown servants' quarters underneath, a detached servants' quarters about 10 meters away from the main building, and a poker room hut at the foot of the hill. Though seriously, the property is surrounded on all sides by National Forest and Bureau of Land Management land. The road leading up to the ranch ends with their gate stopping it. The ranch home is old and well maintained. There is antique furniture, an antique stove, even an antique pool table that doesn't have the right dimensions for modern play because it was made 100 years ago. We're up here for my friend's B-Day, and we're making the most of it. Cooking steaks, drinking liquor, playing cards, and dancing with girls who are also spending the night. It's a normal night. We're all getting along well, and around 1 a.m. we separate to go to bed. I woke up around 3:30 am. I'm not in my room. I'm not in the outfit I went to bed in. I'm standing fully upright in a room I didn't fall asleep in clothes that I had packed for the weekend but hadn't taken out. Basically, I had somehow in my sleep found a secret passageway between my room and the room right next to mine. I dressed in my packed clothes, went to the secret door, opened it, then walked into the other room and turned all the lights on. Literally every lamp in the room I had turned on individually. Strangest thing that ever happened to me.
Not a story that I read, but a story my dad told to me about my grandpa's experience with a ghost and possession. This thread has already gone on for a while, so I doubt this will be seen, but I don't really care. I can always post it again. Be my grandpa. Lives in a rural town in Mexico, working as a bus driver. Has a fellow coworker that always calls him Gulp as a nickname. His coworker is the only person in town to call him Gulp. One day, coworker is performing maintenance on his bus that he's been driving for years. Coworker loves this bus. He is underneath the bus and it is being held up by a jack. Coworker's kid comes running by and accidentally bumps into the jack. Jack drops and so does the bus, crushing my grandpa's coworker. Bus company takes back the bus, cleans it up, and assigns my grandpa to drive it. Bus is perfectly fine, no problems whatsoever. My grandpa starts driving the bus and is on his usual run. In the middle of his route, the bus conks out. Has to have it taken to the mechanics to get it checked out. Nothing is wrong with it, so he takes it out for another route the next day. On his route again, and just like the day before, the bus conks out. Takes it back to the mechanics, but nothing is wrong. Grandpa drive it again the next day and it conks out yet again. Grandpa takes it back to the mechanics and this time want to check out what's wrong with it with them. Grandpa and one mechanic go to inspect the bus. Mechanic walks into the bus first, my grandpa closely behind. The mechanic walks to the center of the bus when all of a sudden he stops moving. My grandpa asks him what's wrong and goes to check on the mechanic. The mechanic turns around to my grandpa and is crying. His eyes are rolled back and he starts to scream at my grandpa. Gulp, get out. This is my bus. You can't have it. No one can have it. Get out, Gulp. The mechanic keeps screaming like that at my grandpa and the bus starts to violently rock side to side. From outside, another mechanic sees what's going on. The other mechanic runs into the bus and just starts praying while the possessed mechanic keeps screaming the same stuff. The mechanic stops praying and starts yelling, "You don't belong here. You need to move on. This isn't your bus anymore." My grandpa gets his bearings, realizes that it's the spirit of his coworker because no one else ever called him Gulp. My grandpa joins in with the second mechanic. They keep saying that the spirit needs to move one for a couple of minutes, now with my grandpa yelling at the spirit by name. The rocking slowly stops and the possessed mechanic just passes out onto the floor. They pull the first mechanic out of the bus and the second one just explains that the bus was possessed by my grandpa's coworker, but that the spirit finally moved on. Once they all settled down, my grandpa goes to check the bus and it runs. My grandpa takes the bus the next day to do his route and the bus never conked out like that again. My grandpa later quit that job and that's pretty much it.
I unironically saw a skinwalker in a woods as a kid. I was probably about 8 years old at the time and had no idea what a skinwalker even was, but looking back, the description of what I saw matches that of a skinwalker. It was a fairly boring encounter. Saw the thing running through a field on its hind legs, then it jumped a small stream as if gravity didn't apply to it. Something interesting that I remember. There were a lot of reports of break-ins around that area at the time at remote houses, but they could never watch the perpetrator. No one ever managed to kill the perpetrator, even though this was rural West Virginia where everyone has a shotgun within arm's reach. I remember probably 10 years after that happened, I was awake upstairs playing video games when I heard someone run up the stairs, and I knew it wasn't my parents. I won't get into the long of that story, because it would take a lot of words to describe just how creepy that situation was, but here's the short of it. I managed to navigate around it through the house by locking doors, then switching rooms when it would go back downstairs. Happened probably 3 or 4 times. Got into my room and grabbed my gun. It was again trying to open my door when I grabbed my revolver, then it immediately crept down the stairs slowly, could hear it through the walls. I decided to face it head on, went down the stairs and leveled the gun directly at it. It looked like a pale white crackhead wearing all black, which is about what I was expecting. What freaked me out was how it moved like it was in slow motion and was hunched over an abnormal amount. It slowly twisted its arm around and opened the door without breaking eye contact, and slipped around the door like it was made of jello. I chased after it because I was pissed and thought it was a crackhead, and watched it run into the woods barefoot. I have no idea how anyone can run through the woods barefoot that fast in the middle of the night. To someone reading my account, the home invasions and Skinwalker stories may not seem to be directly related, but I believe there is some type of correlation. I think the degeneracy and corruption of soulless crackheads may attract evil spirits, or maybe the evil spirits attract the crackheads, or maybe they're the same thing. All I know is that weird things start happening in nature when the people start turning degenerate in the surrounding community. I remember after my home invasion on many occasions I would have deer walk up to my house in the middle of the night. I'd stand by the door and they'd keep creeping closer until I'd finally shut the door. It seems like they would have just walked right into my house if I didn't shut the door. I know other rural anons have probably experienced similar things. It's not normal behavior for healthy deer to be so trusting of humans in land that has a lot of hunters.
Very young child, like 6 or younger, I can't remember exactly how old I was. Have very vivid memory of walking into my parents' room and watching myself jumping on their bed while they're outside. A moment later, the best way I can describe it is that I flew into myself. All is normal, continue jumping on the bed as I have apparently been doing. The monkey's prophecy comes true, fall off and bump my head. Specifically bump it on a loose metal bed frame that they had just replaced and hadn't taken out of their room yet. Parents come inside and find me on the floor with a big cut on my scalp, it's gushing blood. They rush me to the hospital. Remember sitting in a waiting chair, reaching up, and touching the top of my head because my hair was wet and staring at the red on my hand. I didn't even understand the concept of blood at the time, think it's weird that there's red in my hair. I need stitches but I'm otherwise just fine, got really lucky it was just a cut, apparently. Go home. Sometimes think about the part where I flew into myself. For the longest time I think that I'm somehow remembering the exact moment that I got a soul. Comment about it to my mom one day. She tells me that my entire story happened to my sister, not me. Relays all the things I vividly remember about it to me, aside from flying into myself, obviously. Left me with an emergency babysitter, I think it was my aunt or my grandpa, so I definitely didn't go to the hospital with them. Maybe my parents told me about it in excruciating detail at one point for some reason and I just really latched onto that memory and self-inserted as my sister for some other reason, but I can very distinctly remember all of that happening from the first person. Still a young kid. Building a blanket tent in the living room, watching Digimon. Was a very emotionally closed-off child, actively afraid of having an emotional response to things, no idea why. It's an episode where something sad happens, I think it was a Leomon episode. This episode is about to become sad senses kick in. Default response is to cover my head with a blanket until the episode is done being sad. Still see the TV. Adjust the blanket did have a hole in it, after all. Still see the TV. Confused, realize I can just close my eyes and achieve the same effect. Eyes shut tight. Episode is still playing out in front of me just fine. Cover my eyes with my hands. I can still see it. Stupid child brain has exhausted all options, can't possibly just leave the room, turn around, or turn off the TV. Implications suddenly begin sinking in on me. Suddenly very distressed that there's something wrong with my eyes. Go to my mom. I am a dumb child and can't properly articulate what my eyes are doing. Worded as, I can't not see things. Mom doesn't understand, thinks I'm complaining that it's bedtime and I can't see more of my show or something to that effect. Go to bed and hope that when I wake up, this will just turn off. It doesn't turn off when I try to go to sleep. Lights are off, but it looks like I have a dim flashlight shining against wherever my eyes are pointed. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling all night, trying and failing to make myself sleep. In the morning I have to go to school, and I'm exhausted. Randomly, in the middle class, yawn, big yawn, close my eyes. Blackness. My eyes are suddenly working normally again. Go on with the day, go home, sleep, and my eyes never did that shit again.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.